88 years old, and I would like to talk a little bit about the difference of growing up in my age and the age today. I've had many experiences growing up that kids today have not experienced, but I think that changes in technology drive many of the differences between growing up in the 30s and growing up today. However, the advances in technology have come at a cost.
Carl Mueller entered 8th grade and turned 13 in 1938. In this story, Carl reflects on some of the differences between growing up then and growing up today. Because of the Great Depression, Carl's family lived with his grandparents and 3 aunts. His family moved apartments frequently during this time, whenever his mom, Lillian, found a better deal. Once, an uncle needed to wait at the old apartment that they had just moved into for Carl's dad, Joe, to return from work at the railroad, to let him know that they had moved down the street. In 1936, they all moved into a 2-story house on 84th and Morgan Street on the south side of Chicago. Carl's parents and siblings lived on the 2nd floor, while the others occupied the 1st floor. For much of his childhood, Carl slept on a cot in the living room because there weren't enough rooms. Adult family members pooled their money each week for food and rent. Carl had a paper route and shared that money with his mother. Carl attended Loris, a boarding school in Dubuque, Iowa, his freshman year of high school in 1939. At Loris, classes started at 8:20 in the morning and ended at 4:30, followed by mandatory study hall 7 to 9 p.m., 7 days a week. In addition to an excellent education, there were many memorable moments for Carl at Loris, such as the toboggan ride with Jim Millord and being rescued from drowning in the Mississippi River by Joe E. Brown. Carl was once complimented on his acting skills by Don Enamici. Carl loved Loris, but because money was scarce, he finished at Leo High School in Chicago. Carl served as a Navy corpsman 2nd class in World War II, enlisting after high school in 1943 at the age of 17. In August of 1943, he began training at Camp Farragut in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It was a new camp at the time, but it later became the 2nd largest U.S. naval training station in the world. He later was transferred to San Diego, Seattle, and Oakland before shipping out to Hawaii and the South Pacific. Carl landed in Noumea, the capital of New Caledonia, which was the headquarters for the U.S. Navy and Army and an important Allied base. Carl's ship left port without him, however, while he recovered from dengue fever. Carl stayed in New Caledonia and worked as a medic for much of the war. Later, in August 1945, his outfit was packing for their assignment when the A-bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Their orders to proceed to China for the invasion on Japan were canceled, and the war was over.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above.
After the war, Carl married a neighborhood girl, Mary Cunningham, in 1948. He was 22. Over the next 17 years, they had 6 children, and later followed by 12 grandchildren, with the 10th great-grandchild on the way. Carl worked at Illinois Bell and had various part-time jobs to raise his family. He retired from Illinois Bell in 1984 at the age of 59. Coincidentally, that's the same year he retired from 16-inch softball. Carl's childhood and who he is today was shaped by many events of that time when he was growing up.
Telephone use today is a big surprise to me, which is funny because I worked for the phone company. I didn't spend much time on the phone when I was growing up. Then the telephones were attached to the wall by wires, and initially a phone call required the assistance of a central operator to connect calls. Not every home even had a phone. At my house, we had to insert a nickel to connect to the operator to place a call. I used to get a nickel from my grandpa Jacob for visiting him on Sunday. I bought candy and watched movies with that nickel. I did not spend it on the phone.
In the 1930s, there was one phone for every 3.7 Chicagoans. This was one of the highest rates in the country. In these early years, the telephone was primarily used to facilitate communication within a city or a local area, and people needed to be encouraged to use the phone. Today, 91% of Americans use cell phones to both communicate with each other in close and long distances and to text.
We didn't have a television until after the war, and even then there were only a few stations. When I was growing up, the radio was a primary source of entertainment for us. Our radio sat on a table in the front room of our home. I remember gathering around the radio with the family to listen to Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, The Lone Ranger, Little Orphan Annie, Jack Armstrong, The All-American Boy.
Radio programs were very popular with kids and adults alike. Many of these early radio shows started as comic strips. Little Orphan Annie debuted on WGN Chicago in 1930 and then went national the next year. Buck Rogers, another comic strip adaptation, was the first science fiction program on the radio, starting in 1932. The hero Buck was a space adventurer in the year 2419. In the early 1940s, television stations only broadcasted for a few hours a day. Full-time evening programming began for 4 television networks, all 4 of them, in 1948. And there were 27 television stations at this time that were beaming to an estimated 350,000 television sets across the United States. Household ownership of television sets today is 96.7%. Most households have more than one TV. And today there is access to a multitude of stations every day of the week, every hour of the day, every day of the year. Playing outside with neighborhood kids was also an important part of Carl's youth, and another area of difference he notes between then and now. During the summers and after school, Carl played various games with other neighborhood kids at Gresham's schoolyard.
Though I had a big and loving family, you could say I grew up on the city streets of the south side of Chicago. There were plenty of kids to play with, and that's what we did. We played. We made up games. We found an empty field and played 16-inch softball against each other. No real bases, no umpires, no coaches, and no parents. Just kids interacting with kids and having fun.
Perhaps because they didn't have the technology that's available today, kids in the 1930s spent a lot of time outdoors, playing with other kids in the neighborhood, on streets, on barren fields, or paved schoolyards. Each player arrived with little to no equipment, on bike or on foot. Carl played basketball and 16-inch softball, as well as many other sports, and all of this was done unsupervised, uncoached. Today, youth sports have become a $5 billion a year industry. This money covers cost of equipment, coaches, referees, gyms, and fields. Pickup games for fun, without all the bells and whistles of supervised games, are less common today.
I believe that the children today should learn how to play by themselves. They should get the other kids in the neighborhood and go to the parks and to the fields and take advantage of them and learn how to play without the coaches and the parents, and just enjoy. I believe that in my time we enjoyed more playing our own games without the adult supervision telling us what we had to do and what we couldn't do. Thank you.